Hello and welcome to our presentation on Chamberlain vs. the Queen, number 1, 1983. On August 17th, 1980, Lynn, also known as Lindy, and Michael Chamberlain were vacationing in the Northern Territory. In a twist of events, their daughter Azaria Chantal Chamberlain disappeared from the family tent. It was not until February 2nd, 1982, that the prosecution indicted Lindy and charged her with murder in line with the Northern Territory criminal law. The prosecution charged the husband as an accomplice but treated him as a separate offender. On October 29th, 1982, the Supreme Court of the Northern Territory found Lindy guilty of unlawfully causing her daughter's death with malice aforethought. She was sentenced to life imprisonment following the conviction. Lindy appealed her conviction and sentence to the Federal Court of Australia. However, the court ruled that the appeal was unmerited on April 29th, 1983. On November 28th of the same year, Lindy's lawyers sought special leave to appeal her conviction to the High Court of Australia. After filing the notice of special leave, Lindy's lawyers applied for her release on bail. The higher courts had to determine whether Lindy could be released on bail terms before her request for special leave had been concluded. The High Court of Australia rejected Lindy's request and held that she could not be released on bail terms if her application had not been determined. The High Court argued that granting Lindy bail before the main application was dispensed would belittle the finality of the jury's findings, which had not been overturned. Further, the High Court of Australia determined the appeal and held on February 22nd, 1984, that they could not interfere with the jury verdict. As a result, the court rejected Lindy's application and agreed with the lower court's judgment on the matter. The relevant defendant is Alice Lynn Chamberlain. Her co-defendant is Michael Chamberlain, charged as an accessory after the fact. In every criminal manner, the defendant has a chance to plead mitigating circumstances. Simply put, she presented evidence or facts to lessen or reduce the sentence imposed by the court. Lindy's personal circumstances were relevant because Lindy was pregnant at the time the jury reached a guilty verdict. Before passing the life imprisonment sentence, the presiding judge considered Lindy's health condition. Another mitigating factor was the defendant's character, general background, and offending history. Additionally, Lindy had good character, and the conviction marked her first criminal offence. There was no evidence showing that Lindy had engaged in other crimes to warrant a harsher sentence. Moreover, the evidence on record shows that the Chamberlains had helped the police during the investigation and even participated in the inquest proceedings. The offence was not part of a planned or organised criminal activity. In addition, Lindy was unlikely to reoffend. On the other side of the case, Azaria Chantal Chamberlain is the victim of the crime. Azaria was the 10-week-old daughter of Lindy and Michael Chamberlain. The prosecution had proved beyond reasonable doubt that Lindy had caused the death of Azaria with malice aforethought. According to the prosecution, Lindy had killed her daughter and lied that a dingo had run away with her. The prosecution presented evidence to show that it was impossible for a dingo to take or kill the child. As a result, the only reasonable explanation was that Lindy had killed her daughter and disposed of the body. A murder conviction requires that the defendant have the mental condition and the act or omission causing the death of another. The court cannot convict the defendant of murder without these elements, and it is difficult to describe the impacts of the crime on the victim because the daughter's body was never found, and the court presumed that she had died. Additionally, the victim was the daughter of both accused parents and classified as a vulnerable person due to being very young. In essence, the Crown was the sole complainant against the Chamberlains. Section 156 of the Criminal Code Act of 1983 outlaws the unlawful killing of a person. It provides that if Person A conducts themselves in a way that leads to Person X's death, and they intend to kill Person X or cause them grievous harm, then Person A is guilty of murder. The prosecution has charged Lindy with the offence of murder under the criminal laws of the Northern Territory. Under the equivalent legislation in Victoria, which is the Crimes Act of 1958 under Section 3, murder is punishable by level 1 imprisonment or imprisonment for such a term as the court fixed. An individual is deemed of having committed murder if their conduct satisfies the requirements of actus reus and mens res. The physical element of the offence of murder is where the defendant's act or omission caused the victim's death, or, on the other hand, the mental element of the same offence is an intention to kill, inflict grievous harm, or thoughtless indifference to human life, or the recognition of the likelihood of death. Both elements of murder must exist for a court of law to conclude that a person has committed murder. It is not enough to show either element of the offence to secure a conviction. In this case, the jury concluded that the Crown had proved to the required standard beyond all reasonable doubt that Lindy had, with malice aforethought, caused Azaria's death.
Lindy was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison according to Northern Territory state laws. She tried to appeal the conviction to the Federal Court as well as the High Court of Australia, but failed both times. Under the Criminal Code Act 1983, Northern Territory, murder is the most severe felony attracting a mandatory life sentence. A person handed a life imprisonment in the Northern Territory is not entitled to parole for at least 20 years under Section 53A of the Sentencing Act 1995. In essence, a person sentenced to life in prison has no guarantee of ever being released from custody. In this case, Lindy faced the same situation, as she was uncertain of her release date. Some scholars have argued that the uncertainty of life imprisonment is a cruel form of punishment that should be discarded in the 21st century. Now we move on to what the judge has to say about the offending. There were several mitigating and aggravating factors surrounding Lindy's case, but as we mentioned, she was sentenced to life without bail. Mitigating and aggravating factors refer to the circumstances surrounding the case which the judge could use to impose either a harsher or more lenient sentence. In this case, some of the relevant mitigating factors included good character and prospects for rehabilitation. Lindy and her husband were of good character. Defense witnesses testified that the defendants were good people who loved their children and were strong in their faith. They had no prior convictions and no prior involvement with the law. Even though the judge considered these factors, he was under no obligation to reduce the sentence imposed. On the other hand, the relevant aggravating factors include victim vulnerability due to age and mandatory minimum sentence. Azaria was barely 2 months old and incapable of defending herself. This is an aggravating factor which could have contributed to Lindy receiving a harsher penalty. However, the Criminal Code Act 1983 states that the penalty for murder is death sentence. Even if the judge wanted to impose a lighter sentence, the law would not allow him. During the entire trial procedure, parents Michael and Lindy Chamberlain maintained that a dingo was responsible for the death of their baby daughter. It was only 3 years after Lindy's conviction that new evidence emerged, proving that Lindy may in fact be innocent. This new piece of information prompted a royal commission inquiring into the convictions. 4 coronial inquests and 12 years later, the court confirmed that Azaria was killed by a dingo. The Chamberlains were pardoned, exonerated, and compensated. The Chamberlain case was a national controversy. It is the most highly publicised trial in Australian history, and it continued to make headlines even decades after Azaria's disappearance. The case erupted globally and was eventually turned into movies, TV series, plays, and other forms of media. This image here on the left is the cover of the film A Cry in the Dark, starring Meryl Streep as Lindy Chamberlain. The image in the centre is of an Australian TV miniseries documenting the true life story of Lindy Chamberlain. Her story was also told in theatres, in Letters to Lindy, a play written by Alana Valentine. This case featured in other shows such as American sitcoms The Simpsons in Season 6, Episode 16, as well as in Seinfeld Season 3, Episode 10. Evidently, this case is extremely popular and well known. However, with the amount of public attention it received, it highlighted the need for change within the Australian legal system. The Chamberlain case holds significant value in the Australian criminal system. The case as a whole, specifically case number 2, is important because it changed how the courts viewed expert opinion evidence and how judges instructed the jury in criminal trials. This case uncovered the prejudice that exists within the jury system. It found that expert opinion evidence can be unreliable and subjective. Moreover, several courts have made reference to judgments in this case, such as M v the Queen 1994 and Shepherd v the Queen. These judgments, often referred to as Chamberlain direction, set the standard for proof. Circumstantial evidence could be used by the jury to decide on the verdict if they believe it satisfies beyond reasonable doubt. The Chamberlain case will forever play a role in Australian legal history. The case was a complete failure in terms of justice. Lindy Chamberlain was denied bail, served 3 years in jail before she was finally exonerated. Fortunately, the Australian justice system was able to learn from their mistakes and make necessary changes to the law. That brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.